Hello ladies and gentlemen, once again this is Jeremy Smith, Photog Joe the Great. Here lately there's been a lot of new cameras announced and I've been sitting around waiting on them all to get in my hands. One of the main cameras I've been waiting on is Sony's new Alpha 6000, and thankfully this camera has finally shown up. This camera actually replaces Sony's NEX6. Now the naming scheme at Sony has gone a little bit nuts lately, but basically all you guys need to know is that Sony is kind of getting away from the whole NEX name, and they've decided to call everything, whether it be mirrorless or whether it be a DSLR, they've decided to call everything Alpha. So hence Alpha 6000 on this one. Over the NEX6 that this camera replaces, the biggest difference that we see is the fact that this one can shoot at 11 frames a second with full autofocus, and it actually does very, very good. I'm actually going to be devoting a video just to talking about that, and that will be coming in the not so distant future. But for the time being, just know that the focusing in this camera is just absolutely incredible. Over the NEX6, one of the main reasons why they're able to achieve such fast focus on this camera is because they've incorporated a lot more phase detect focus modules on the sensor. So instead of it being a unit with 25 contrast detect and 99 phase detect points, this camera still retains a 25 points contrast detect focus, but it has 179 phase detect focus points now. So that's basically why this camera is able to have such accurate subject tracking, and it, as I said, it does very, very well. One thing that I did see is kind of a downside on this camera is that we still don't have a microphone input, so perhaps at some point Sony will be coming out with a bit higher model that will incorporate that. But we do get a clean HDMI output on this one, so if you do want to connect your camera to an external video recorder, it is possible to do that now. Anyways, enough about all this. We're going to go ahead and take a closer look at the camera. You'll notice that it's very, very similar to the size of the NEX6. Very similar. It does come with the same 16 to 50 lens that we've all come to know and love at this point. And it's not a bad lens. It's obviously a kit lens. If you are looking for something more serious in a lens in this range though, I would highly recommend buying this camera body only and looking at Sony's new 16 to 70 f4, which is a Zeiss lens, and it's obviously going to be a much, much nicer optic. So that's something to consider. But otherwise, for just everyday general shooting, the 16 to 50 is not bad either. This camera does have a mode dial, which is something that we first saw make its debut on the NEX6, so it is nice to have that there. We do have a single command dial as well. We've got a customizable function button here, and we also have a standard type hot shoe. So Sony, they've pretty much just about entirely made the transition from the old school Minolta hot shoe, and that's definitely a nice thing. It's nice to not have to fiddle with adapters if you're going to be using any type of, Pocket Wizard or anything like that. So definitely nice. We do have a built-in flash. We just press the button there, and it raises up. It still has the same style that we have on all the other Sony mirrorless cameras with the built-in flash at this point. So yeah, you can still do the whole unofficial bounce flash if you want to. One thing that I was a bit shocked by on this camera is just the fact that the electronic viewfinder on this model is actually a little bit lower resolution than what it was on the NEX6. So basically it's about half as many dots. This is actually not something that I found to be much of an issue whenever I started using the camera, but if you shoot with this camera side by side with an NEX6, it is something that's noticeable, but thankfully it's not something that's a big difference. And it is no doubt a cost-saving measure on Sony's part. So that's something that's not a bad thing. And speaking of costs, this camera cost $799 USD with the 16 to 50 lens. And if you decide to go with the body only, so maybe you want to be able to use a different lens, or if you have something that's a bit more specialized in mind and you want to just skip the kit, you can go body only on this one for $649 USD. So very nice there. Ports are on the side. If I can open the door, there we go. So we do have Sony's USB connection here, and it's kind of a multi-interface type thing. They do make some different cable releases for this. Sadly, this camera is also a plug-in type USB charger, and this is something that I talked about in my Alpha 7 review. It's not necessarily a bad thing if you also have a plug-in charger. So I do welcome the additional way to charge the camera. However, a camera at this price point, I think that they should include both charging options. So anyways. But if you want to be able to charge your batteries separately, you can buy Sony's $50 battery charger. At the bottom here, we have our HDMI. And as I mentioned before, it is an uncompressed HDMI. And as you can see, unfortunately, no microphone jack. Near field communication. And back here, the LCD is not a touchscreen, but it does still have the same tilting mechanism that we have on the NEX6. So very nice there. Taking a quick look at kind of the control interface in this camera, there's a couple things I noticed that I was very, very happy about. The first thing is, on Sony models in the past, and this is something that I talked about a lot on the NEX7, but on a lot of the models in the past, if you went to change your ISO, you were limited to changing your ISO in full stops. And on the NEX7, I was talking about how with the camera at that level, it should not be that way. You should be able to change in thirds. So that's the first thing I noticed on this camera, is that you do have ISO adjustment in third stop increments now. But the thing that really got me excited is the fact that if you are now in manual mode, you can actually come in here and you can put the ISO on automatic. That is awesome. That is something that I noticed that they changed on the Alpha 7 and 7R. So I'm definitely glad to see it on this camera too. So that is something that is a very, very big deal in my opinion. A few other things I noticed about the camera. On the camera, by default, you've got a few different customizable function buttons. The C1 function button up here, if we go ahead and press that, allows us to come in here and have a quick and easy access to change our focus modes. So that's something that's very nice. And then we have another one down here, C2, which gives you a nice little quick menu. But the cool thing about all these is the fact that you can actually change all this. But this brings up like a little help menu thing where you can see, it tells you different shooting situations and kind of gives you some feedback on how you could achieve certain effects, things like that. So that is nice, but you can customize all these, as I said. To give you an idea of how the tracking works on this camera, I do have it set up right now, so you can see how as I move the camera around, I mean, notice how well it tracks. And this thing is insanely fast. You know, even in here in relatively low light conditions, things like that, you can see that I'm able to go in. And I mean, it's insane how fast this thing shoots. So we're going to be talking about that in a video in the future. But definitely if you guys come up with anything else, just let me know in the comments below. And I'm going to be, like I say, I'm going to be spending a lot of time with this camera. I might even buy one of these. I like it quite a bit, actually. We've got, one last thing I'll show you here is the fact that in the menu here we do have the Sony apps. So that's something that basically works like it does on the NEX 6 and also on the Alpha 7. So basically Sony, they have a few different apps you can download. One for remote shooting. They've got an app for, you know, HDR, things like that. So that's something that's kind of nice. And since this does have near field communication, we have a few different options on how we can actually send photos as well. So we can send photos to a smartphone or to a computer, or we can use the app and actually be able to control the camera over Wi-Fi with a smartphone or tablet. So if you guys are interested in how that works, write me in the comments below, and I'll make a video specifically talking about that in the future. I am going to take just a few samples, and I'll put those in the description for you guys. As always, I always shoot my sample photos in RAW and simply convert with the default settings in Lightroom. So you guys will be able to look at those in the description below. And if you have any questions, definitely let me know. Don't forget to subscribe to see all the future videos on this camera. And until next time, this is Jeremy Smith, Photographer Jay the Great, signing off.